Jacob is on his deathbed in chapter 48. He first blesses Joseph's children, Ephraim and Manasseh. He crosses his hands. It's kind of a cross blessing. Is that a word? And then we have the general blessing of all the sons in chapter 49. He dies in 49:33, and in a very moving scene in chapter 50, he's buried by Joseph and the brothers at Machpelah, at this piece of real estate in Canaan, even though they're at this time living in Egypt. Well, let's bring it together here. Hardship and pain abound in the life of Jacob. His words to Pharaoh in chapter 47 when they meet, he says, "My years have been few and hard, and they have not surpassed the years of my fathers during their pilgrimages." In other words, he feels that his life is really not that great. Well, it certainly doesn't have as much to show as perhaps Isaac's and Abraham's lives did. And it's an amazing scene where he actually meets the Pharaoh. And interestingly, he's giving his blessing to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh, the ruler, the king of the invincible Egyptian empire, is being blessed by this wandering nomad, not a poor man, but a man without land. A man who represents the God, the true God, over against the false gods of the Egyptian pantheon. Oh, there's so much theology in this. I've got to stay away. Well, hardship and pain. He had run away from his parents. While he's away, his mother apparently dies. He endured the death of his beloved wife, his favorite wife, Rachel. He went through what he believed was the death of his son, and that scarred him deeply, I believe, even though they were eventually reunited. And at the end, he insists that he must be buried in Canaan. In other words, he has the right perspective in the end. Let me share a few things we learn about God. This is an important part of each lesson. First, even if God appears to us, and we will be improved for the exposure for having met God, our basic personality type will probably remain unaffected. Certainly the Lord will not force us to change. That was the case with Jacob, and that's the case with us. We have to be very careful about saying, well, I didn't really change, therefore I didn't really understand, or I didn't have a radical shift in my behavior, therefore God's Spirit was not in my life. That's a very tempting, but ultimately humanistic conclusion to draw. Next, God does not spare His chosen ones from tragedy. Just because you're chosen, Jacob was chosen, doesn't mean there won't be some really hard things. And we may pray for God to take away the cup, but as we know, He may say no. Third, we can wrestle God for His blessing, but if He's already promised it to us, this is wholly unnecessary. Why spend all that anguish, that energy trying to get God to give us what He's already promised He'd give us, or what He in fact has already given us? We can wrestle God for His blessing, but if He's promised it to us, this is wholly unnecessary.